thanks everybody for coming out. Thank you, Ernie and Jennifer, for inviting me to come and talk. I live in Oregon City, but I travel throughout the Pacific Northwest and actually the whole West Coast, giving disaster preparedness talks. We're unique in the Pacific Northwest in that at some point, if you're not familiar with it, we have the potential to have one of the largest earthquakes on Earth. So there goes your head, right, for the whole time. We've got some great vendors and volunteer folks out in the lobby. You will run screaming from here into their arms because you will want information from Safe at Home and the Hams and the Red Cross. And we're going to talk about a wonderful program toward the end of the presentation called Map Your Neighborhood. And you'll see the benefits of doing a program like Map Your Neighborhood as we go through this thing. And thanks for coming out tonight. This is fantastic that we've got all the folks here. So we're doing preparing for disasters. Now, how many people know about the Cascadia subduction zone? All right, so a pretty good number. The rest of you are going to be very, very surprised when we get to that part of the presentation. And my motto is, be prepared. Y'all are laughing. I don't understand. I'm deadly serious about this because she who controls the toilet paper controls society in a disaster. Think about it. Men buy food in a disaster, women buy toilet paper. Much more practical. So some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to talk about billion-dollar disasters and how they are impacting the whole United States and the implications that they have for you and your family as we continue to move into more and more billion-dollar disasters. We're going to talk about earthquakes and other calamities that can happen in the Pacific Northwest. Simple things that you can do. Y'all aren't laughing at these. I worked really hard on these. Yeah, tongue texting. That's the next big thing. Forget tweets. It's tongue texting. Right. Simple things that you can do to prepare for any type of disaster. And then finally, you'll meet some friends of mine at the end of the presentation. First, I want to get this out of the way. We survived 2012. And that's good. But here's what we're going to do as we move forward. We're going to tell everybody born after December 21st, 2012, that the apocalypse really happened. That we fought the aliens and the zombies for years and years and we won. And anybody who denies that this happened will tell the other folks their minds were wiped by the aliens and they don't remember. In a couple of generations, we'll have it in the textbooks, it'll be history, and I'll be very proud of everybody. Yeah, pretty silly, but it'll work. Now, back to the toilet paper. When I said she who controls the toilet paper controls society after a disaster, here are some really, really good examples. In 2010, there was a magnitude 8.8 earthquake off the coast of Peru, a subduction zone earthquake. This is a grocery store in Santiago, a city of about 9 million people, 2 weeks after the earthquake. They didn't go to the Costco ahead of time, I don't think. Tokyo, the largest metropolitan area on Earth, 36 million people. This is a grocery store 2 weeks after their subduction zone earthquake. And this is a grocery store in Montgomery, New York, 2 days before Superstorm Sandy hit. So this is a pretty compelling reason to start thinking about putting aside food and water for supplies to begin kind of a preparedness program. We hear a lot about 72-hour kits. Forget it. 72-hour kits are great if you live in the Midwest or the East Coast. But here in the Pacific Northwest, you ought to plan on 2 or 3 weeks if we get the big one. That's what you got to plan for. And I'm very, very serious about priorities when big disasters happen. I've got my stuff set aside. I don't know about you. Washington and Oregon wines are really cheap, but they're really good. We've moved into a new era in the United States. Billion-dollar disasters have become the new normal. What do I mean by that? 2011, there were 14 billion-dollar disasters in the United States, totaling about $55 billion worth of damage. 14, but wait, there's more. This past year, we had 11 billion-dollar disasters, and one of those disasters, Superstorm Sandy, has already cost $65 billion in damage, and the price tag is still going up. About 65% of the country is still in a drought cycle. And it's estimated that that has cost the United States so far anywhere from $40 to $100 billion. Now, what does this mean? Federal resources, the first responders, and the recovery groups that respond to disasters are stretched very, very thin. There aren't enough resources to go around. And you have to begin planning on surviving you and your family and your friends and your neighbors. It's personal responsibility. Nobody's coming if we get a really big disaster. There were tens of millions of people that found that out after Superstorm Sandy came through. There's still tens of thousands of people that are homeless or don't have power yet because they didn't prepare. It gets pretty serious. So, wouldn't it be nice if preparing was this easy?
Relax. I think I've got an emergency sinkhole kit in here somewhere.
Oh man, I gotta climb stairs? Forget it.
No one stays in the sinkhole.
Well, these surface dwellers.
So, what seems to be the problem?
I want one of those earthquake kits. That would be pretty cool. Here are the excuses I hear. Everywhere I go. It's never going to happen to me and my family. If it does happen, somebody's going to save me. There's nothing I can do about it, so why bother? I'm too busy, go away. But our brains are wired not to want to think about things like this. Our brains are wired to think about happy things. And it's difficult to kind of take yourself out of that situation and sit down and begin to think, okay, you know, something bad could really happen. And I need to prepare, and I need to help my family prepare because I'm responsible for my family. And I just found and put together this, and you can find this on my website, Ready, Set, Prepare. A gentleman, Franz Otzman, just a regular guy who he and his family got caught in Superstorm Sandy. He posted this information online about 3 weeks after the storm had come through. They still didn't have power at their home. So here are some of the observations from Franz. The excitement, coolness, and camaraderie wears off around day 3 when you don't have any power. Yes, it can happen to you. No, there is no one coming to save you. If you don't have water stored, you're in trouble. A couple of cases of bottled water is not water storage. Stored water can taste nasty. Powdered drinks. Dad, all the money you've ever made means nothing if you can't keep your kids warm. Mom, every kind thing you've ever done for your children will be forgotten if they're hungry. Cash is king. All your credit cards and savings are worthless unless you can generate dollar bills pronto. You eat a lot more food when you're cold, and will need more food than you think when your kids are out of school for 2 weeks. Kids do not like washing up in cold water. You better have as many supplies set aside for your pets as you do your family. Trying to find cat litter was impossible. You really do not want to be the unprepared parents. Your kids will turn on you very quickly. Your master's degree in accounting suddenly means nothing. If you're lucky, you'll find the guy in your neighborhood who knows how to wire a generator to an electrical panel, or get the well pump up and running on inverter power, or has first aid training, or owns every power tool known to man. These go on and on and on. It's just amazing. Someone who can cook a decent meal by candlelight over a barbecue, open fire, or camp stove is worth their weight in gold, which you can then use for cash. All the food storage in the world means nothing if your kids won't eat the freeze-dried stuff that's been sitting on the shelf for 4 years. And finally, all the expensive clothes in your closet mean nothing if they can't keep you warm, unless you can burn them when you run out of wood. The same goes for shoes and hats. One final one. When it gets dark at 4:30 p.m., the nights get really long and deadly boring without power. And it sucks to just be sitting in a dark house for hours and hours. Well, wasn't that fun? Billion-dollar disasters seem to affect everywhere in the United States except the Pacific Northwest. We've had a couple in the last 50 years or so, the 1962 Columbus Day storm, eruption of Mount St. Helens. But for the most part, we don't get the big billion-dollar disasters in the Pacific Northwest. You know the number one reason that people move to the Pacific Northwest? It's for the weather. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. Oh yeah, it rains a little bit, but we don't get billion-dollar disasters either. But we can experience, one way or another, just about any type of natural disaster that can happen anywhere in the United States. In 2010, Almsville, Oregon got hit by a tornado. Big windstorms are pretty much a regular occurrence at the coast. So we've been really lucky so far to avoid these huge billion-dollar disasters, which means because we don't get a lot of earthquakes either, we really don't think about being prepared. This is a picture from Portland looking at Mount St. Helens 1980 in May. We forget we live within an active volcanic mountain range. And I found this graphic online. This is pretty good. 35 miles that Longview is away from Mount St. Helens. There have been 57 major eruptions in the last 4,000 years in the Cascades. That's more than a couple of times a century. The last one, 1980. So there is a very good possibility that we will see, many of us, another eruption in our lifetimes. It will probably be Mount St. Helens. It's been the most active over the last 4,000 years. But the two most dangerous mountains, what emergency management professionals consider the most dangerous mountains, are Mount Rainier and Mount Hood, because of the close proximity to population centers. All active volcanoes. And you know, some people say, oh, you know, in the Pacific Northwest you can golf in the morning and ski in the afternoon, or surf in the morning and ski in the afternoon. Well, where else in the United States can you walk a volcanic evacuation route in the morning and a tsunami evacuation route in the afternoon? And during the evening you can look out for zombies. It's interesting. As we congregate in cities, we forget about disaster preparedness. Amanda Ripley, who's written a book called The Unthinkable, Who Survives When Disasters Strike and Why, has a really interesting take on living in cities. We flirt shamelessly with risk today, constructing city skylines and hurricane alleys and neighborhoods on top of fault lines. Largely because of where we live, disasters have become more frequent and more expensive. But as we build even more impressive buildings and airplanes, we do less and less to build better survivors. These days we tend to think of disasters as acts of God and government. Regular people only figure into the equations as victims, which is a shame, because regular people are the most important people at the disaster scene every time. More than 80% of Americans now live in or near cities and rely upon a sprawling network of public and private entities to get food, water, electricity, transportation, and medicine. We make almost nothing for ourselves, so a disaster that strikes one group of people is more likely than ever to affect others. But just as we have become more interdependent, we have become more detached from our neighborhoods and our traditions. This is a break from our evolutionary history. Humans and our evolutionary ancestors spent most of the past 100,000 years or so living in small groups of relatives. We evolved through passing our genes and our wisdom from generation to generation. But today, the kind of societal ties that used to protect us from threats get neglected. In their place, we've substituted new technology, which only works some of the time. The other thing that happens when you live in population centers is a disaster can happen, but it gets cleaned up and it goes away. And the absolute most incredible example of that happened here in Kelso. How many of you know about the Alder Creek landslide? What an amazing event. $100 million, the largest, most expensive landslide in our history. I actually went and toured this back in 1998, and it was one of the scariest, creepiest experiences I've ever had, because this neighborhood actually, huge chunks, whole city blocks slid down the hill together and were 200 yards from where they had been built. And the ground was completely water saturated. So you would walk down a street in this neighborhood. There were still cars in the driveways, there were still furniture in the houses, but there was nobody around. And all of the houses were creaking and groaning because they were slowly moving downhill. It was amazing. How many of you got to see this? Can you still get up there and kind of look down and see the remnants of houses and stuff? A perfect example for getting that disasters like this can happen. So in any given year, what's the biggest disaster threat to families and businesses in Washington? Home fires and business fires. Home fires and business fires happen to people more than every other type of disaster combined in the United States. That is the #1 thing that the Red Cross responds to, is people that have been forced out of their homes because of a fire, they've lost everything. This was a dryer fire. The dryer line, the lint in the dryer line caught fire. I have some friends who went out to dinner. They had a really big, nice house with their kids. They came back and their house was fully engulfed in flames because their big Sony flat screen TV had caught fire. It can happen in an instant. Most of us have smoke detectors. Some of us may even know where the fire extinguishers are, except you haven't seen it for a couple of years because it's in the, under the sink, kind of stuffed in the back there. We got to do better than that. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And business people, the best way to catch your owner's or manager's attention is to burn the building down next to you. They'll think about a disaster plan at that point. And always remember, tweet after you get out of the building. So what we're talking about is risk. and how much risk you are willing to take to live in the Pacific Northwest, hoping that a big disaster doesn't happen. But remember, it's not just you, it's you and your family. So how much risk are you willing to take on for your family in the hopes that a big disaster doesn't happen? Here's a good example.
Who do you think you're looking at, huh? What, you like the way I drive? What, you want a piece of me? Let's go out and get you some, huh? Well, you can't speak up by anybody that you think you're better than me. Well, you think, oh, I like the way you drive. We don't think you
The truck monkey, a revolutionary idea you'll only find at Suburban Auto Group, in April by Attorney General.
All right, back in the trunk.
I understand Cowlitz County, Ernie, y'all are planning on distributing trunk monkeys at the end of the presentation? Wouldn't that be fun? I'll bet this guy has a really good emergency plan at home. All right, so we don't get billion-dollar disasters, but at some point in our future, we have the potential to have an earthquake larger than California will ever experience. An earthquake that could be one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded because of this. So here we are, and oh, by the way, you guys get some really big earthquakes in the state of Washington. Oregon, the biggest earthquake we've ever had was a couple of magnitude 6s back in 1993. But since 1949, you guys have had 6.5, 7.1, 6.8, 5.8, and I bet you felt all of them here in Longview. Pretty good shakes. The Nisqually earthquake probably shook pretty good here. I mean, it shook my building, the office building I was in Portland, and it lasted about a minute and a half. You get 6 times more earthquakes in Washington than we do in the state of Oregon. Oregon's in this little quiet zone. But at some point in our future, we have the potential for an even bigger earthquake, and it's because of this little boxy thing right here that's sitting off the coast. This is a remnant of a very ancient tectonic plate, an oceanic plate, that's been diving under North America for 150 million years. And it was, at one time, the largest plate on Earth. The Earth is broken up, the surface is broken up into giant plates, and they move around like rafts and they bump into each other. And that was the largest plate on Earth. And now that's all that's left of it. The Pacific plate is now the largest plate on Earth. But they're in constant motion. That little Juan de Fuca plate is actually diving under North America because it's heavier than the continent. The oceanic plate is heavier. But they're moving about an inch a year toward each other. And they're locked together because it's not a real smooth process. The plates get locked up. The coast actually bulges upward from the effects of these earthquakes. I mean, the two plates being locked together. Now, an inch here, an inch there doesn't sound like much. But over hundreds and hundreds of years, it builds up an incredible amount of stress. And where these two plates meet, it's called the Cascadia subduction zone. That is a 650-mile long earthquake fault that sits about 75 miles off our coast. It's only in the last 25 years or so that we've known that we could get earthquakes on this subduction zone. Before that, most scientists thought the plate was so small that it just didn't generate earthquakes anymore. Unlike every other subduction zone anywhere in the world. Because it's an American subduction zone. And it wouldn't dare. But the earthquake that hit Japan in 2011 was the same type of earthquake. The earthquake that hit Sumatra in 2004 was the same type of earthquake. The earthquake that hit Chile in 2010 was the same type of earthquake. These are very, very different earthquakes than what we think of as like a California type earthquake where there's an epicenter. And the earthquake waves kind of radiate out from that. When this earthquake fault breaks, chances are the whole 650 miles is going to break. and generate an earthquake that could be magnitude 9 or even bigger. That's how you can get a magnitude 9 earthquake, because 600 miles of the earthquake fault ruptures. And it rips the seafloor apart. That's how the tsunami is generated, because you've offset thousands of feet deep of water, and now the water's moving at 500 miles an hour. It's, you know, geologically speaking, it's an amazing event. I would love to be in an airplane if it happened. This is pretty scary, but there's some good news about it, which is hard to believe. These earthquakes aren't killers. It's what happens after the earthquake is over that causes the fatalities. The Japanese had 20,000 people that perished in their magnitude 9 earthquake. 98% of the people died from drowning. In Tokyo, a city of 36 million people, they were about 200 miles from the epicenter, about as far away as Portland is from the Cascadia subduction zone. One person died as a result of the earthquake in Tokyo. You don't see a lot of fatalities in earthquakes like this because they're not hard, violent shaking. They're more long, rolling earthquake waves. And homes do pretty well in these. That's another good thing. Steel and concrete reinforced buildings do really well in these types of things. This building, pretty new, would probably be fine. It's the older brick and mortar buildings that don't do well because they can't absorb that sideways motion. And infrastructure gets beat up all over the place. Roads, bridges, power, water lines, anything that's long and rigid, like a bridge or a water line or a natural gas line. Because what happens is, with these long period earthquake waves, long span objects begin to resonate, to dance with the long earthquake waves. And these earthquake waves can last minutes and minutes and minutes. And that's where the damage comes from. How often do these earthquakes happen? We know over the last 10,000 years from the geologic record that we've managed to uncover over the last 25 years or so, that there have been 20 earthquakes where the whole fault has ruptured. Magnitude 9 to about magnitude 9.2 earthquakes. Big, big earthquakes. That's about once every 500 years. Last one was 313 years ago. What am I up here talking about, right? Well, just within the last few years, Dr. Chris Goldfinger from OSU has been doing research offshore where he looks at underwater landslides associated with these big earthquakes. He's found another 10 to 20 events, a bit controversial. Not all scientists will grant him the 20 events, but they'll all pretty much agree on at least 10 more events that have happened where just the part of the fault from Northern California off to the coast of Longview. Right here, yeah, see? Ruptures independently from the big ones. What does that mean? Well, you get 8.5 to 8.9 magnitude earthquakes when this happens. So what that means is, over the last 10,000 years, there have been 30 to 40 of these big 8.5 to 9.2 earthquakes off our coast, with the last one 313 years ago. That's an average of about once every 250 to 330 years. We're within the window for one of these earthquakes to happen. One of the reasons you guys came out here tonight is preparing for something like this. You prepare for this, you're prepared for anything. So put this out of your mind and just think preparedness. Kind of hard to do, I know, because I'm really going to hammer it home now. This is an animation that the Pacific Seismograph, Northwest Seismograph Network put together. And it's going to walk you through in kind of real time what one of these big earthquakes would look like, a simulation, an animation. And what it's going to do, there's the fault. And we're going to pretend that the earthquake fault is rupturing starting in the south. of the fault line, because that's where a lot of the scientists think it's going to happen. And as it rips the seafloor apart, moving at about a mile a second, you see the energy being released. That green circle is the primary wave. It's moving at about 11,000 miles an hour. That's the first jolt that everybody will feel. And then things will settle down a little bit, and then here come the secondary waves, the shear waves, the surface waves, 6,000 miles an hour. And these are the ones that do the damage, because these are the ones that really get the ground moving. You can see already that the southern part of Oregon is experiencing this earthquake, and roads and bridges are being devastated down there. If you had a friend in Brookings, they could call you when the earthquake started, and you would probably get a 2 to 3 minute warning before the ground started shaking in Longview. Pretty amazing. But as the fault continues to rupture, now the Willamette Valley is pretty much feeling the really hard effects of this earthquake. This is going to affect everybody from Northern California through southern British Columbia, west of the Cascades. 10 to 13 million people, all at the same time affected. That's why it's difficult to respond to a big event like this. Why the Japanese had trouble, why the Sumatrans, the Chileans, because so many people get affected all at once. Everybody's probably just fine, for the most part, during the earthquake. But after it, things get tough. The earthquake can last up to 5 minutes. The one in Japan was 6 minutes. These are long earthquakes. But once again, it's not hard, violent shaking. I heard reports from the Alaskan earthquake in 1964, magnitude 9.2 earthquake. Some people said it started shaking, shook. They got bored, sat back on their couch, waited for it to stop. Other people reported that dishes were flying across the house out of the cabinets. So you never know. But you can see it's still rupturing. People in Seattle have just felt this, and we're only 2 minutes into the earthquake. What does it look like? All right, this is an animation. We're going to take you underneath the ocean and then dive about 6 to 10 miles underneath the seafloor, where the two plates are grinding against each other. The pressure builds after hundreds and hundreds of years, and the two plates rip apart. The North American continent will actually jump as much as 10 to 15 to 20 feet to the west, just like that. Back up on land, here comes, and I did this for the folks in Oregon, obviously, that was the primary wave that came through, and here's the surface wave. If you were outside, you would see 6 to 10 foot high rolling waves coming down the street. It would be amazing. The walls in your home will look like snakes. And then about 20 minutes after the earthquake is over, the tsunami arrives. When it hits dry land, it's still moving at about 35 miles an hour. So imagine Aberdeen. And it's not just one wave. The wave comes in, energy is dissipated, the wave goes back out, the second wave comes in, the third wave comes in, and this goes on for 12 to 24 hours. You know those silly tsunami signs at the coast that everybody sees? They can save your life. They're also the most stolen road signs in the United States. People come from all over the world to steal our tsunami signs. It's still going, folks. All right, that's depressing enough. All right, so I said to you, earthquakes aren't killers, right? This type of earthquake. So what's the shaking look like? I'm going to show you some video from Sendai, which was at the coast, the closest large metropolitan area to where the earthquake happened in Japan. This is in an apartment. It's sort of shaking. Things are falling off the shelves, but the person that's shooting this video doesn't feel compelled to run out of the building screaming, which is a good thing. This is in an office building. People are still sitting at their desks. And it dies down a little bit, and then it'll start shaking again, a little bit more, and it'll die down, and it'll start shaking again, and that's what we'll feel, 60 miles inland from the coast, is this type of shaking. So we're back in Sendai. This is shot during the earthquake. Buildings aren't falling down. It's a little bit hard to stand up. Things are shaking back and forth, but not too bad. I would think I would just park my car and get out. This is a tighter shot of the way that it's shaking. So, one of the things you don't want to do if you're at the coast is jump in your car to try to leave. See that circle? That's the tsunami. It's already come ashore and it's moving across in front of these people that are stuck in traffic. And guess what's happening behind them? Guy gets out of the car. Where's he going? Shut the door! Okay. This is just one of the most amazing videos. The person that shot the video survived. They ended up in a warehouse. Their car floated into a warehouse and they climbed out. But a lot of people weren't that lucky. So, won't shake as hard as you think, lasts longer than you can ever imagine. Home's probably going to be okay. Chimneys do not do well in these types of earthquakes, just like in the Nisqually earthquake, just like in the 49 and 65 earthquakes in the Puget Sound. The most damage was from chimneys. And just make sure your chimney doesn't fall on you, I guess. The vast, vast majority of buildings will be just fine. Yes, there are going to be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of buildings damaged, but we have good building codes in the United States, especially in Washington, Oregon, and California. So the vast majority of buildings will be fine. But you're not going anywhere. If there's damage to roads and bridges, if there's no power, how are you going to pump gas? How many gas stations do you think there are in Longview that have generators? I would bet a big fat goose egg. So how do you get gas? You don't. You end up looking like those folks at Hurricane Sandy, standing in line with a 5-gallon tank, and then you fill it up and you go home, and if you got a generator, great, but you're not going anywhere on 5 gallons. Highway 101 ceases to exist on the Oregon coast, and along any coastal roads are gone. Any roads over the Coast Range are gone. The Megler Bridge is in the water. The Lewis and Clark Bridge has fallen down. Most big bridges across the Columbia are gone. I-5 has ceased to exist as a transportation corridor because of damage to roads, bridges, all that kind of stuff. And nobody's really sure how long it's going to take to get it back open. I-84, the same thing, gone. Landslides, bridge damage. So Oregon and Southwest Washington, for the most part, are isolated into communities and even down into neighborhoods. That's a little scary. And there are aftershocks. They're getting magnitude 7 to magnitude 7.5 aftershocks in Japan. In Sumatra, they're still getting magnitude 8 aftershocks. 5, 6, 7, 8 years after that earthquake happened. So we can expect to have aftershocks. Nobody's really, because the last one happened 313 years ago, nobody really knows what the aftershocks are going to be like, but we know that they will happen. And finally, you're not prepared and neither am I. Intellectually, because I talk about this all the time and I'm paranoid as heck, I understand. But emotionally, I can't imagine that this could ever happen to me and my family and my neighborhood and my city. And that's the thing you have to wrap your head around, is emotions. This could happen, and it could happen at any point. It could be 100 years, could be 50 years, could be tomorrow. Oh, and if it's tonight, I get under one of these, I claim one of these tables. And y'all are on your own for the rest of them. So about this point, these are the two things that you're experiencing. Either your brain has shut down or it's exploded. So I'm going to give you a little bit help here. 4 simple things that you can do this week to start to get prepared. The first one is make a phone call. There's your tongue texting, see? That was a joke. And what you want to do is set up an out-of-state contact that knows how to text or tweet. If you are over 30 and don't know how to text or tweet, there are people in the room here tonight under 30, very few, but a few, that can teach you how to do that. Find somebody under 30 to teach you how to text or tweet. We are told that it will be pretty much impossible to get phone calls through. But because texts and tweets take such small data packets and continue to be sent until they're received on the other end, you would be able to get information out. And that person out of state could be your contact. If I'm on one side of the Willamette and my wife is on the other side and my daughter's in a school someplace else, we can all check in through that out-of-state contact and know that we're safe and what the other person is doing. So that's one, out-of-state contact. 2, play with your smartphone. How many of you have smartphones? The rest of you Luddites, get with the program. 5 years from now, that's the only thing you're going to be able to buy. So you might as well bite the bullet. It has a high learning curve at the beginning, but then they're fine. Because a smartphone can become the most important safety tool that you own. Emergency contact numbers, first aid CPR instruction. Your phone can be a lifesaver. How many of you have flashlight apps on your phone? Cool. You can create an in case of emergency app, and I'll show you one of those. Create a list of rally points. Put prescription medicines in a list on your phone. Food and medical allergies. Contact information. Keep photos of loved ones and pets on your phone. If you're separated from your pet in any type of disaster and you go down to the shelter and ask for your pet back, what are they going to do? They're going to say, prove that this is your pet. And what's the easiest way to prove it's your pet? You and the pet in a picture. And there it is on my phone. That's Fluffy, my rodent. Please, can I take her home? Lots of great ideas on that. The Red Cross has an awesome first aid app. It's free. Pretty much teaches you anything in an emergency, how to respond. They also have a really wonderful earthquake app. Tells you where the earthquakes happened, how big it is, where there are shelters located. It even gives you some psychological resilience, some, help somebody who's having a tough time in an event like this, some ideas and tips. Here are the 2 other apps that are free that are really neat. The ICE standard. So you're in an accident, you're unconscious, medical people show up, they turn on your phone, and the first thing they see on that welcome screen is medical information. Doctors, insurance, hospitals, all that stuff. And there They know what kind of blood you've got, all those kind of things. So it comes in really, and this one also gives you ideas of how to respond to the emergencies. And then the iTriage is the same thing. It gets you the answers to basic medical questions, finds medical facilities nearby. You can keep your medical records on it. Pretty cool. All of a sudden, you've got an awesome first aid safety tool in your pocket all the time. And this is the best first aid app for pets. This one costs about $4 by Jive Media. If you still refuse to get a smartphone, there are other things that you can do. And this is one of them. This is the Go Stay Kit. It's like a smartphone for people who don't know how to use smartphones. But you can keep contact information, medical information. You get the idea. Important documents. Gives you an idea of emergency supplies. And if you go to gostaykit.com, you can find one of these. It also probably wouldn't hurt to have a little pocket first aid guide with you in your man purse or, you know, in your car, something like that. And then this one was developed by a pharmacy, and then the Oregon Emergency Management folks picked it up. What you do with this little green book is you take it to your pharmacist and you say, Mr. Pharmacist, please take a label from every prescription medicine that I'm currently on and put it in my book. And now, if I have to go to a shelter, I can take this book up to a doctor or nurse and say, this is my current prescription. Can I please have this medicine because I left home without it? That's a pretty good idea. All right, here's number 3. Go visit this website, The Burning House. The idea of this website is, if you only had a few minutes to get out of your house because of fire, what are the most important things that you would want to take with you? And people post pictures of those things on this website. It's just wonderful. This is a great way to begin a conversation with family, friends, neighbors about getting prepared. What are the most, if you had a fire at your house tonight, what would be the most important things that you would want to save? And I like the idea of having a little suitcase underneath the bed. You can always put the stuff back if you're using it on a daily basis, but you know right where it is. If you have to jump up out of bed, boom. Those precious things are with you at all times. And then finally, 4, read this book, The Unthinkable. It'll train your brain how to respond in a disaster. It's really amazing. So one of the things it teaches you what to do is calculate your risk. Where you live, what are the disasters that could happen to your home? Do you live in a floodplain? Are there landslides nearby? Obviously, we know the earthquake could happen. Home fires could happen. Are there any other? Do you live near railroad tracks that carry hazardous materials? Do you live above the interstate? But you get the idea. So knowing what risks you face helps you put your plan together, but it also gives you peace of mind. You feel better because you kind of feel like you're in control a little bit. It'll teach you, this book will teach you how to reduce your anxiety level. Some yoga breathing exercises. When I do business workshops, I bring in a yoga instructor that teaches people how to breathe. And you breathe for 30 seconds or a minute, and you clear your brain, and you can make decisions in a disaster that aren't going to affect, that aren't going to be bad decisions. This one's really interesting. Cultivating Resilience. People who have positive attitudes and know that they can affect the outcome of an event, if it's a bad event or a good event, will survive in a disaster more often than folks who don't. So positive attitudes, meaningful purpose in life, and convinced that they can learn from both good and bad experiences. And there are lots and lots of examples in the book of this. Get in shape. What helps you in real life helps in a disaster. And finally, get to know your neighbors. In a big earthquake, 95% of everybody that is helped or rescued in an earthquake is helped or rescued by their neighbors. Pretty much everybody helped or rescued by their neighbors. Bake some cookies. Go over to your friend's house. Hey, Joe, I don't know you real well. No, let's amend that. I got a case of beer with me. Hey, Joe, I don't know you real well. I'm really sick to death of you and your friends partying all night long. It's disgusting, but here's a case of beer. Rescue me first. Sounds silly, doesn't it? There's actually a program that Cowlitz County has called Map Your Neighborhood. It brings neighbors together to begin this process. Who's got the power tools? Who's got a chainsaw? Who's got some medical training or first aid training? Who's taken, Red Cross courses in CPR, AED? And who's got the wood stove? Who's got the wine cellar? That's the house we're all going to stay at. People can get together and do like a prepareware party or a prepare potluck where you get everybody in the neighborhood together and you put emergency kits together. Or you just talk about it over a couple of beers and brats and things like that. It's a wonderful program. I encourage people all over the Pacific Northwest. The program was actually developed by the Washington Emergency Management Division here in your state. And it is a fantastic program. And there's sign-up sheets in the back. When's the first class begin?
There's going to be on February 21st, there's going to be one from noon to 1 and one from 6 to 7, I think. And those are going to be at the General Administration Building in Kelso. So all the information's there. You can come talk to me, or you can grab a flyer and RSVP.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to be the block captain. But maybe there's somebody who's really involved in your neighborhood association or something like that. Anyway, you get the idea. It's a wonderful program. And I love this quote. I just saw this quote actually this morning from Alicia Johnson in San Francisco. You don't recover from a disaster as an individual. You recover as a community. It's the other thing we have to remember. We're going to protect our family. We're going to help our neighbors understand there's a possibility of a big event, but how can we help our community as well? What organizations do you belong to that might be able to help your community in a disaster and you haven't thought about that? What's the Rotary Club going to do? Can they get people together? Lions Club, Elks, your church, another place that would, because where are people going to congregate? They're going to come to churches, they're going to come to schools, they're going to come to city halls, they're going to come to fire stations. If you have kids in school, what's your school's plan? If you don't know, you need to find out. You also need to find out when the school was built and how safe it is. And if it was built before 1990, then you need to begin lobbying for having it seismically retrofitted so it's safer. We're doing that in Oregon. We've actually got a fund. We've spent about $50 million so far. But we've got 1,500 schools in the state that are at high or very high risk of collapse. The Red Cross is an incredible resource. Lots and lots of classes. You can volunteer if you're even that way, want to, because that's all volunteers that are back there manning the Red Cross booth tonight. Did you know they do babysitting classes? That's pretty cool. And pet first aid. I know you want to learn how to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to your cat. Won't that be fun? But that's the idea. There are incredible resources in your community. Emergency Management Division, the Cowlitz County Emergency Management people, the Red Cross, this program that Safe Home has in the back. Stop and talk to them because it's a pretty neat program, especially if you're getting on in years. It's a pretty neat program to find out about. We've got, hopefully everybody picked up the 4 simple things you can do. I've got a few more flyers up here. 2 things to leave you with. So disasters are inevitable. What people forget is they are personal. Whether it's a home fire, a car accident, or a giant earthquake, it happens to you and your family. How you prepare for a disaster ahead of time directly affects your quality of life after the disaster is over. We're the first generation in modern history that understands the fact that we can get these really big earthquakes because we've only known for about the last 25 years. So share this knowledge because survival is optional. I'll leave you with a modern tale of survival from the Pacific Northwest.
There's no such thing as Yetis.
Pretty cool. And remember, this from the Prophet of Doom.
Civilizations exist by geologic consent, subject to change without notice.
Thank you, everybody. And you're gonna talk about Map Your Neighborhood. Red Cross folks are gonna come up and talk a little bit, and then we have a raffle for fabulous emergency gear.
Well, I wanted to see first if anyone had any questions before I take over. Does that work?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. And I've got some reference books up here and things so too. So, yeah, yes, ma'am. So this earthquake, when it happens, will be felt in Salt Lake City and in Boise. It'll be rumbling, but there won't be any damage. Most researchers and scientists say that the damage will be in the Willamette, basically the I-5 corridor and west. East of the Cascades, there probably won't be a lot of damage, but they're in the same boat as everybody else because they got no power. Roads across the the Cascades are damaged. They got no food coming in. They got no gasoline coming in. So they're stuck just like everybody else, although they may be able to head east from there. Yes, sir?
Will we be flooded?
Will you be flooded? You mean like a tsunami?
Yeah, I mean, we're a long ways from the ocean.
Yes. So will the tsunami come up the Columbia? Most scientists say no. It probably won't get much farther than Astoria because, the mouth there is like 5 miles wide, so it'll lose all its energy. There are other geologists, and I have a geophysicist friend who says that there's certainly the potential for tidal fluctuations. They get tidal fluctuations at the base of Bonneville Dam. So if the tide's coming in, we could certainly see some surges of water coming up the Columbia. There's also a phenomenon called a seach. When you're in a bathtub and you start sloshing water, that's a little tiny mini seach. And long period earthquake waves and large bodies of water love to resonate. They love to dance together. And you start moving a large body of water for minutes and minutes and minutes, and it's going to move out of its banks. So that'll just be something neat to see, I hope. Yes, sir?
Are all the dams safe on the country?
Ah, the old dam question. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers assures us that all the dams will be just fine. Yeah, Katrina's a really good example of, no telling. There was a, yes ma'am?
What about liquefaction zones?
Liquefaction. So there are three effects from earthquakes. You get amplification, where some types of soils amplify the earthquake waves. You get earthquake-induced landslides, and you get liquefaction, where water-saturated soils, certain types of soils, can turn to quicksand. Saw a lot of that in Christchurch when they got their big earthquake, and we saw a lot of that in Japan. But it doesn't kill people. I have video after video of people walking across liquefied soil. Cars might settle a little bit, buildings might settle a little bit, but that's about the extent of liquefaction. You're not going to drop in a sinkhole. Yes, sir?
How did you determine that that earthquake happened in 1700 when no one...
Oh, that's one of the most amazing scientific detective stories of the 20th century.
Japan.
That was the final clue, was a orphan tsunami from Japan. And I actually have a book on it. Actually, two books. One of them written by the godfather of Cascadia, Brian Atwater, written The Orphan Tsunami of 1700. And one of his first clues was a ghost forest on the Copalis River. Western red cedars that were all dead in a forest. And he realized that they had been inundated by a tsunami. And the ground had dropped at the coast, and at high tide, these cedars were being inundated with seawater over and over. They all died. He took tree ring samples. They all died exactly the same season, between 1699 and 1700 in the wintertime. And then the Japanese found in written historical records an orphan tsunami, a tsunami not associated with an earthquake. They obviously get lots of earthquakes in Japan, 360 a day on average. So scientists in Japan and in the United States put their knowledge together, and what they realized was January 26th, 1700, at 9 o'clock at night, a magnitude 9 earthquake ripped the seafloor apart, sent a tsunami slamming into Native American villages up and down the coast, but also sent a tsunami racing at 500 miles an hour across the Pacific, where 10 hours later it hit coastal Japanese communities with still a 15-foot wall of water, and it went down in their written records. That information was published in 1996. So that was the definitive proof. Pretty neat story. And there's another book here called Cascadia's Fault that talks about that as well. Yes, sir?
Also, do you think the cell towers are all going to stay standing?
Or what going to stay standing?
Cell towers.
Ah, the old cell tower question. So, you know, in Japan, they never lost internet or cell service because they have a interconnected web. We don't have that. So most cell towers probably will be just fine. But if there's no power, many of them have backup generators. So you might be able to make a phone call for the first few hours after the earthquake. But remember, millions of other people will be trying to call as well. So chances of you getting a phone call through are pretty much nil till things settle down. So that reminds me, how many of your hams in here? You want to make sure that you can communicate, talk to the ham folks, because that is the absolute best backup that everybody uses, from federal and state government down to local government, is having a ham. And it's easy to get a ham license now, and you can get a ham set that'll plug into your car lighter for like $200, $300, and now you can communicate with anybody in the world for the most part. How am I going to charge my battery? Well, you got a car, you can charge it in a car, and this little nifty device from the Red Cross, it's a radio, weather band, AM, FM. It runs on batteries, hand crank, solar. It has a USB port in the back, and you can charge your phone using it. It's a pretty nifty little idea, and they've got it online on the Red Cross website. So, I mean, you can figure out ways to, there are some amazing solar systems now that you can get. Small ones, you know, the size of a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that can charge your cell phone within just an hour or so. So there are lots and lots, you know, once you begin investigating how to do things like this is all, see, you're already putting your emergency plan together, is how am I going to keep my cell phone charged? The story of the Northridge earthquake and what happened in the Northridge earthquake. And that was about the size of the Nisqually earthquake in 2001, except it was only 10 miles deep and the Nisqually was 35 miles deep. That was the reason that there was only $2 billion damage in Washington for the same size earthquake, and they had $40 billion of damage in the Los Angeles area. You know, I've got a bibliography on my website of other books I recommend, and one of them is called A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, and it talks about spontaneous communities coming together after a big disaster to take care of each other. It's not the, I got my gun and I'm not letting anybody share. It's how can we help each other to get through this event? And that's what happens. That's what really happens. The media won't tell you that. Many times your government won't tell you that. But that's actually what happens. So that's a good thing. Yes, ma'am. Can earthquakes trigger volcanic eruptions? Yes. That has happened in the past, but nobody knows if a Cascadia earthquake could trigger one of our volcanoes here. You know, there's a book called The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. It talks about improbable events happening, and Japan and what happened in Japan were 3 improbable events, one after another. Massive earthquake, they said, could never happen. Tsunami, they said, could never be that big. Fukushima, a nuclear power plant that was never supposed to have that happen. What are the black swans that happen in conjunction with our big earthquake? It'll be amazing to see. And scary. All right, last question. Yes, sir.
Normally want to leave a building, go outside?
Ah, good question. So, how many of you have heard of the triangle of life? All right. Every time there's a big earthquake, you will probably get an email from a friend of yours that says, here is this great idea. Do not drop, cover, and hold like every single emergency management and first responder organization anywhere in the world says you to do in an earthquake. Not run out of the building, drop, cover, and hold, get under a table, sturdy desk, things like that. But the triangle of life, the guy that came up with this, says get down next to the sturdy table or desk. Because if you get under the sturdy table or desk, you'll die. But if you get down next to the sturdy table or desk, the rainbow ponies from Candyland will come down and make a magical space where nothing can touch you. If somebody sends you this email, please let them know that this is a bunch of baloney and it could get people killed. So, don't run. Most injuries in an earthquake happen because of things falling on you from your shelves or ceiling tiles or things like that, or you running outside and the parapets of the buildings falling on you. Bolt those bookshelves to the walls and things like that.